The first is really around customers who say, I'm moving the overwhelming majority of my applications to the cloud, but there are some workloads that have to stay on premises. Maybe because they have to be close to something like a factory. How can you help me do that? And this is kind of how we got started with the very unusual and deep partnership that we have with VMware and the joint offering that we spent a bunch of time together working on and launching called VMware Cloud and AWS, which allow customers to use the same software and tools they've used to manage their infrastructure via VMware on premises, but also to use it to manage their infrastructure in AWS. And this has been something that customers have been very excited about. This is the only managed service that VMware runs of this sort like this, and has a fair bit of traction. We have about 4 times more customers than we had a year ago at this time, 9 times the number of VMs that were there, and a number of companies that you know of that are using it, like Cerner and Accenture and Penny Mac and S&P Global and Scripps and the state of Louisiana. But customers have appropriately said, well, that's great. I love that I can use the same tools I've managed my on-premises infrastructure to manage AWS, but that makes it easier to move applications to the cloud. What about those applications that I told you guys I have to keep on premises for a while? And this was very much something that we were thinking about over the last few years, because there was a model out here to try and solve this issue that we heard from customers didn't work for them. And that's because they provided this solution that was different APIs, different tools, different control plane, different hardware, and it was really hard for customers to use. And it's not that surprising. When you're taking 2 things that are as different as on-premises and the cloud, and then try and connect those 2 things together with a clunky bridge, you end up with something that's clunky and hard to use. And so when we thought about this problem, we took a different approach. We thought about it less as building this clunky bridge between these 2 different things, and more about distributing AWS on premises. And that's why we announced last year in this keynote that we were building something called AWS Outposts. And so Outposts are racks of AWS servers that we deliver to your on-premises data center, and it's got AWS compute and storage and database and analytics, and you decide what composition you want, and we'll deliver it and plug it in for you and set it up and maintain it and patch it, so it's not a lot of work for you. And we announced that it was coming a year ago. We've had a lot of customer conversations about things that were really important to you that we build inside of it. And I'm excited to announce the general availability today of AWS Outposts. And so Outposts will come with EC2 and EBS and ECS and EKS and EMR and VPCs and RDS, and we'll be adding S3 in the first half of 2020 and a bunch of other things over time. But this makes it such that you can now run those workloads that need to live on premises because they have to be close to something with the same AWS APIs, the same AWS control plane, the same AWS hardware and tools that allow you to leverage that learning and seamlessly connect with all your other AWS applications in our public regions. So it's really easy to get started. You just go to the console, you set up an Outpost, you decide what composition you want of computer, storage, or database. When we deliver the Outpost to your door, we'll install it, and we'll handle all the maintenance. And then once it's plugged into power and network, you'll be able to see your new AWS Outpost in your AWS Management Console and be able to use it to provision resources into your Outpost. So very excited that this is available today. It comes in 2 variants. If you're somebody who is used to and wants to use the AWS APIs and control plane to operate your Outposts alongside what you're doing in the rest of the AWS public regions, then you'll use the AWS native Outposts, and that's available today. If you're somebody that wants to still use the VMware control plane like you're using for VMware Cloud and AWS, as a number of customers are, you'll use the variant of Outposts that's our VMware Cloud and AWS Outposts, and that'll be available in the early part of 2020. So very excited to give this to you today. Now, we solved for this issue of I have certain workloads that need to live in my on-premises data center and can't move to the cloud. But there's a second barrier that we're hearing from a number of customers, and it's particularly larger organizations who say, I have end users in a particular geography that have workloads that are latency sensitive, where they need single-digit millisecond latency, and where I don't have a data center, or I do have some kind of colo or clunky GPUs under my desk that I don't want to manage anymore. What can you do about that? And that's a very interesting issue as well if you're a cloud provider like us, because it's very expensive to launch these mega regions like we have in 200 or 300 cities around the world. We have a lot more coming, but I don't know if we've really contemplated 200 or 300 more. And so we thought about this issue, and we thought about, can we actually provide a solution? Take the typical examples. These are real examples. If you're a media company in LA where you do content creation or you do video games, those workloads, as they're building them, need single-digit millisecond latency. Or take a company in New York or Switzerland who are in financial services that have to be close to market data. They need those single-digit millisecond latency. And so we thought about, is there a different type of construct we can provide you that solves this issue at scale? And I'm excited to announce a brand new type of AWS infrastructure deployment called local zones, which is a new type of infrastructure deployment that places compute, storage, and database services close to large cities, starting with our LA local zone available today by invitation. And so local zones have compute and storage and database available to you. And we kind of went back to our roots a little bit as we were solving this problem. We said, if you think about the history of AWS, we have built in these highly flexible, low-level building blocks that you can build a lot on top of. Think about how many services, both AWS services and your services, are built on top of things like S3 and EC2. And as we were worrying and thinking about this type of problem with local zones, we realized that Outposts was a really useful, low-level, flexible building block. And so we've taken Outposts and we've done some innovation and variants to it. And now for customers, we couldn't bring an Outpost to their on-premises data center in those areas because they didn't want on-premises data centers. We've built local zones in metro cities that are buildings that we manage that have Outposts in them with compute and storage and database and analytics so that you can have single-digit millisecond latency for your end users in those metro cities where they need that latency to get their job done. The first one is available in LA today, and you can expect more from us moving forward. So we solve for workloads that have to stay in on-premises data centers. We solve for workloads in certain geographies where your end users need single-digit millisecond latency there, but you don't want to have data centers. The third barrier that we're increasingly hearing from customers is that as they have more and more mobile and connected devices all over the world that have to be connected to the cell network, how can they get that type of single-digit millisecond latency there as well? And with the promise of 5G, people have become very curious about this. They've started to believe this is possible. But like most new technology, this was true with cloud and with big data and with machine learning and with IoT. It's becoming true with quantum computing, and it's true with 5G as well. There's a lot of hype and a lot of misunderstanding about what the technology is. So if we want to try and figure out collectively how we can leverage 5G to give those types of customer experiences, first we have to really understand what 5G is and what it does, and then how we can leverage it. And I can't think of somebody better to explain to all of us how 5G works than our very close partner, the CEO of Verizon. Hans Vestberg, please join us.
Hey, Andy. Great to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, Hans. Appreciate your being here. Let me start with a question, which is, what the heck really is 5G? How is it different? Why is it so much better than 4G? And why does it matter for all of these folks?
It's mattered a lot for all of you in this room, and it matters a lot to you. 5G is so different than any other G we've ever seen before. I mean, think about 2G to 4G. It was basically you took a 2G phone with SMS and voice, and you have today a 4G phone with great experience. If it's a Verizon phone, you can stream it. Two different capabilities, speed and throughput. Those were the only two. In 5G, it's actually 8 capabilities. We call them the 8 currencies. The 8 currencies, I give you some examples so you just understand how big difference it is. So the speed is going from, if you have a 4G phone today, 40, 60 megabits per second, to up to 10 gigabit per second for an individual device. And if you have a 5G phone in this room right now, you have 1.2 to 1.8 gigabit already, because we have 5G in here. So that's the speed. Throughput is going to be terabytes per square kilometer. Today we do gigabytes per square kilometer. Latency, which is super important for the services that you are developing, we're going from maybe 40 to 80 milliseconds down to 10 milliseconds on latency in the network. And then you can combine all of this, but you also have how many devices you can connect. Today we can connect 100,000 devices per square kilometers. In 5G is 1 million. So it's much more than people, so it's devices. And you can go on with the other currencies, but I think the most important is that when you can slice these and you can give them to individuals, applications and things, you have a transformative technology that's going to transform consumer behavior, it's going to transform businesses, it's going to transform society. You need to build this in a certain way. You need fiber to basically all the radio base stations. You need high frequency spectrum. You need SDN, software-defined networks. You need to virtualize the network, and you need a lot of real estate at the edge. Verizon builds all of these 8 currencies. Not everyone is going to do it. We build it right, as we say, because we want to give this to all our customers. And already now we have launched 5G Home in 2018, which is a fiber-rich home broadband. We have launched a 5G mobility. We did that in April. We have now 18 cities up. We're going to have 30 by year end. And of course, we are continuing with a lot of new innovation. But this is just the start of it. So the 8 currencies is what matters for everybody in here, because that's what you can develop on. And that's the new things we're bringing with 5G.
That's pretty awesome. So people won't have to be tethered anymore to the Wi-Fi or the lower performing LTE networks?
I think that, first of all, with our spectrum position with millimeter wave, with these big frequencies, you can get enormous throughput. You can get the 10 gig, and you can do the latency of 10 milliseconds. So of course, that's why we can do it. But secondly, the connectivity and the speed is just 2 things. The other thing is, we can, with the 5G now, bring the processing out to the edge, because we have a virtualized network, and we can bring it out. We call that the mobile edge compute for 5G. That's really what we can do. And here, the innovation of consumers, low latency, immersive experience, machine loads that are heavy, all that can happen at the edge right now because of the virtualized network and the 8 currencies.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, you can tell that 5G is pretty compelling. And if you think about, as we've thought about what that means for our AWS customers, if you want to have the types of applications that have that last mile connectivity, but that actually do something meaningful, those applications always need some amount of compute and some amount of storage. And what they've done in the past is they've reached out to AWS to go get that compute and storage. But the problem is there are so many hops along the way. Like you have to go from the device to the cell tower to the city aggregation site to the regional aggregation site to the internet and then to AWS and then back. And the types of applications that are most excited about using 5G, these are things like machine learning at the edge, or autonomous industrial equipment, or smart cars, or cities, or augmented or virtual reality. They can't afford and don't want that round trip back and forth. And so what they really want is they want AWS to be embedded somehow at these 5G edge locations. But think about it, if you're a customer, what you want to do. Like, you can't walk up to a telco and say, can I be at your edge? And then, because no one telco can serve the entire world geographically, you'd have to go to lots of telcos and say, can I be at your edge? And then you'd have to manage all the work between these different telcos and how they manage it with some kind of abstraction. And you'd still want all the same API tools and APIs and control planes and things of that sort. And so this has been a hard problem for people. to try and solve. And
Yeah.
about 18 months ago,
Yes.
Hans' team and my team started working on this and have collaborated very deeply, and excited to announce a new AWS service for you now called AWS Wavelength, which allows you to build applications that deliver single-digit millisecond latency to mobile and connected devices with AWS compute and storage embedded at the edge in 5G.
Whoa!
And so what we've done is we've embedded AWS storage and compute at the edge of 5G networks. We've started with Verizon, who was our collaboration partner and really a true innovator in this space. And now for the sensitive portions of your application where you want this single-digit millisecond latency, you have way fewer hops to actually get to the compute and storage. You go from the device to the aggregation, the city aggregation site, and then right at that 5G city aggregation site is AWS. And so it's a much better experience. You don't have to worry. We're launching, our first launch partner is Verizon. We'll also have KDDI and SK Telecom and Vodafone as part of this, and more over time. You don't have to worry about figuring out how to manage across all the different telcos. We've built an abstraction that makes it easy for you. And as I said, we started with Verizon, who's often the leader and the innovator in this space and tends to invest most in its network.
Thank you. Thank you. No, for us, this is a historic day. I mean, as I said, we were first with the 5G home. We were first with 5G mobility in the world. And of course, to be here today to talk about, we are now bringing the 5G mobile edge compute out to the edge. We call it the Verizon 5G Edge. And then with the collaboration of our engineers that has been working together for 18 months, we virtualize our network all the way from the radio to the packet core, and then bring in wavelength there in order to create a platform for all of you out there to actually start innovating on the 8 currencies. Low latencies, massive throughput, and all of that. And I think that it's just a massive moment for us at Verizon to actually do this and lead this sort of movement in the world with a lot of transformation with this new platform. We already are in preview in Chicago, so we have already customers up using this technology. So it's much more than just the buzzwords. We actually have it in preview, and we have NFL there. We have Bethesda, which is a gaming company that is using the low latency. But over time, we will be able to do slices with all these currencies together with AWS Wavelength, where we can move the loads, of course, all the way up to the higher levels of the data centers down to the wavelength. And that's the beauty, because that's going to be a game changer. And I think that everyone here should be extremely excited for it. We at Verizon are extremely excited to collaborate with the best and greatest cloud company in the world and bring this to you as innovators out there. And if you really want to see it today, you can go into our booth, because Verizon has a booth in here where you can actually start experience these 8 currencies. But as the year progresses in 2020, we're going to deploy much more real estate when it comes to edge compute together with AWS, and see that we are bringing this to all of you so you can innovate for your customers and partners. So it's a great day.
It is. In case it's not obvious, we're pretty excited about giving you this.
Yeah, we are.
And we think we think it pretty dramatically changes what customers are going to be able to get done. We couldn't have chosen a better collaboration partner. It's a deep partnership. Yes. We love working with Verizon and with your team, Hans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. It's great. Thank you. Thank you, man.
So we talked about, as you're making this big transformation, sometimes what happens is that companies get stalled when they can't figure out how to move every last workload. And that's what we've spent a fair bit of time trying to solve, and we'll continue to work on trying to solve for you moving forward. But these are 3 big barriers I think we've been able to help you knock down. How do I deal with my applications that have to stay in my on-premises data center but want to work seamlessly with the rest of my AWS applications? How do I deal with end users and geographies where they need single-digit millisecond latency, but I don't want data centers, again, that works seamlessly with the rest of my AWS applications? And then how can I leverage this incredible innovation in 5G to have single-digit millisecond latency with all my connected devices and the latency-sensitive parts of those applications. Those are 3 big barriers that we have knocked down today for you. So I'm going to close with just a few comments. I think that when there's a big change happening, and I think that the change that's happening with the move to the cloud is the most titanic shift that we've seen in technology in our lifetimes. It's sometimes hard to think about how to handle it. And I think that a lot of people will tell you that they love and embrace change. But I would say that my experience is that that's not necessarily true. I think a lot of people get nervous about change, and they don't know what it means for them and whether they have the skills to be successful in that change and what it means for the scope of their job and all the things they spent a lot of time working on and the suppliers they've built relationships with. And as such, a lot of times when there's a big change and transformation like this, the first reaction is to dismiss it. And then when it becomes hard to dismiss it because people are moving to it because there's value, then the reaction oftentimes is, well, we can do it better. We can do it less expensively. We can do it more performantly. And then when that doesn't appear to be true, a lot of times the reaction is just to try to slow roll it. Do just enough to nod at it that it looks like you're actually paying attention to it. But the problem is, if you dip your toe in the water for long periods of time in transformations that radically change industries, you find yourself at the tail end of a big shift and suddenly way behind. And sometimes it's pretty startling how far behind you become, how quickly. I mean, the history of business is littered with companies that did not adjust to big technical transformations and were left in the dust. The reality is, with what the cloud offers you, it gives you a once-in-a-lifetime chance to totally reinvent the customer experience, to totally reinvent your business, and to build things that were never possible before. And that, to me, is an opportunity that all of us have that is unlike any other in our lifetime and probably will be unlike any other moving forward. And so the opportunity is right here, right now. Take it. We'll be here every step of the way to help you. And I hope you have a great rest of the week at reInvent. Thank you.